In this video, I'll be ranking the worst winning versions of every Mr. Olympia champion in a tier list. That means we're only looking at Olympias that, they actually won the title, so no runner-up finishes or comebacks that fell short. By worst version, I'm talking about the least impressive Olympia win in every single Mr. Olympia champion's career. Maybe they were often conditioned, downsized, dealing with injury, or simply not as dominant as usual. For guys who only won the Mr. Olympia one time, I'm still going to put them in this list, but keep in mind that there's no better or worse version to compare it to. They're going to go into a tier based on how strong that one win actually was. For the tiers, S plus is for champions whose worst winning version was still pretty amazing, whether they had a very high baseline or were one-time winners who brought a very iconic physique to the stage. S tiers for wins where the champion clearly deserved the title and beat the field handily, but their physique wasn't an all-time best look. A tier covers victories that were earned but came with noticeable flaws. Whether due to weaker competition or visible shortcomings, they still got the job done. B tier includes wins that were debatable and could have gone either way, with the champion looking vulnerable or winning on reputation rather than pure dominance. Finally, C tier is for the most controversial wins, where the champion looked off, the competition might have been stronger, or the result still sparks disagreement, debate, and all things like that until this day. Starting off with the very first Mr. Olympia winner, we have Larry Scott in 1965. As the pioneer of the title, Scott helped launch what would become the most prestigious event in all of bodybuilding. He had the ideal look for the era: wide shoulders, narrow waist, and arguably the best arms in the world at that time. His posing was pretty polished, his presentation was impressive, and he had already built a massive fan base with the Weider magazines. But when we look at it critically, 1965 stands out as his weakest win, mostly because of the context. The lineup was pretty tiny in my own opinion, just 3 competitors, and the level of competition was also pretty limited. Harold Poole looked great and brought serious muscularity, but he was still young and hadn't fully peaked. Earl Maynard was fresh off the win at the Mr. Universe, but was clearly not a serious threat to Larry Scott. There was no prejudging, no prize money, and honestly very little suspense. Physique-wise, Scott looked nearly identical in 1966, but that year featured a much tougher battle. Sergio Oliva made his debut, and the judges had a much harder decision to make. In contrast, the 1965 Olympia was practically handed to Scott before he even stepped on stage. So, while Larry definitely looked pretty impressive, this was easily the easiest Mr. Olympia win of all time. For that reason, I would have Larry Scott in 1965 going into the A tier. It's not because his physique was off, but because the win overall lacked a real challenge or pressure. He looked like a champion, but he didn't really have to prove it in the way that others would have to do later on. Next up, we have Sergio Oliva in 1967, the year he claimed his first Mr. Olympia title. I think Sergio was around 26 years old when he won his first title, and even then, he was being called the myth all the way back then because of his freakish proportions that broke every single idea of what a bodybuilder was supposed to be at the time. He had wide shoulders, a tiny waist, and muscle bellies that were cartoonish to look at in real life. But while the foundation was clearly there to become an all-time great, his physique in 1967 was still a work in progress. This version of Sergio wasn't yet the unbeatable physique that we would see from him in 1968 or 69. He was big, yes, but not quite at his biggest. His condition had improved from prior years, but he still lacked the deeper detail and polish that would come in later wins. And more importantly, this was far from a dominant victory. Behind the scenes, the judges actually picked Harold Poole as the winner at first, until the judges kind of reversed that decision backstage. That alone tells you how tight the contest actually was, and how vulnerable Sergio still looked at that point in his career. While it was still a very solid performance overall, it's clearly his weakest of the 3 Olympia wins. His potential was very obvious, but he hadn't fully grown into it yet. For that reason, I'm placing Sergio Oliva's 1967 Olympia win in B tier. It was a great physique for the time, but compared to what he would become just a year later, or many years later even for that matter, this version was kind of only scratching the surface. Moving on into the 1980s, we arrive at Arnold Schwarzenegger's shocking return and one of the most talked about Mr. Olympia wins ever. After retiring in 1975 with 6 consecutive Olympia wins, Arnold had moved on to movies and promotion and other things like that. Then, just one day before the 1980 Mr. Olympia in Australia, he announced that he would be competing, completely blindsiding the lineup and the fans. In the moment, it felt like a complete disaster. Arnold was not as big as he used to be, and his legs in particular were a massive weak point. Guys like Chris Dickerson, Mike Menser, and Boyer Coe looked sharper and more conditioned on the surface. But looking back at pictures and footage, Arnold still had a lot of qualities that nobody else really had. Huge arms, chest that was massive as well, a wide detailed back, and a trademark silhouette and flow that nobody could match. Even off his peak, he still had a presence and completeness that others struggled to match. To be honest, no one really nailed it that night. Menser lacked refinement, Dickerson was great but not unbeatable, and Arnold used his charisma and experience to outpose the field. Was it controversial? Absolutely. But in hindsight, it's not as outrageous as many people make it out to be. Because of that, Arnold's 1980 win goes into the B tier. He was clearly past his prime and had a lot of visible weaknesses, but the overall package still brought enough to justify the win in a lineup where nobody truly dominated. Also, if you guys are enjoying the video so far, a like and sub would really be awesome, as it helps out the channel tremendously. Now we have Franco Columbo in 1981. Following Arnold's controversial 1980 return, the 81 Mr. Olympia brought its own drama, this time with Franco Columbo. After winning the title back in 1976, Franco suffered a brutal knee injury at the World's Strongest Man competition that many thought would end his career. But 5 years later, he made a very unexpected comeback at the age of 40 years old, stepping back on the Olympia stage for a final time in Columbus, Ohio. On paper, it was a great comeback story, but on stage, it was a completely different story entirely. Franco's upper body was still dense and well developed, but his legs were a major issue. After years of injury and rehab, his quads lacked a lot of size, shape, and separation, and it threw off his entire overall balance. Meanwhile, guys like Tom Platz, Danny Padilla, Chris Dickerson, and many more came in shredded to the bone and very complete. Padilla looked sharper than ever, Platz brought legendary legs, and Dickerson was very polished from head to toe. When Franco was announced as the winner, the audience erupted in boos. Coins were thrown, fans walked out, and yet another Olympia ended in outrage. Even the judges later admitted that the scoring system that year was kind of flawed and that Franco's win was more a product of voting mechanics and political ties, of course, rather than pure physique dominance. Overall, there's really no sugarcoating it. Franco's 1981 victory belongs in C tier. While his legacy is very legendary, this particular win felt like a misstep for the sport and remains one of the most debated results in all of bodybuilding history. Now let's talk about Frank Zayn's first Mr. Olympia win in 1977, the beginning of his legendary run, but also the weakest of his 3 titles. With Franco Columbo sidelined by injury, and Arnold fully retired, at least allegedly at the time, the Olympia stage was wide open. It came down to Zayn and Robbie Robinson, a true battle. Zayn's classic lines and symmetry versus Robbie's dense, freaky muscle and raw power. Going into the show, Robbie was definitely the favorite, but he came in off, noticeably holding water and lacking the crisp definition he'd shown earlier that year. Zayn, meanwhile, brought his usual tight waist, flowing structure, and near-flawless posing. But even then, he wasn't quite at his best either. He was lean but not razor-sharp, and his size was still limited compared to what he would show in 1978 or even 79. Fortunately for him, nobody else was truly on point that night. Zayn beat out Robbie and earned his first ever Sandow trophy, but the win wasn't as dominant as the score might have suggested. He deserved it, no doubt, but the lineup was underwhelming, and the overall conditioning level across the board was lower than in years that followed. For that reason, Frank Zayn's 1977 Olympia win would go in A tier. It was a solid victory and the start of a new era, but compared to the refined, fully dialed-in version of Zayn when it came to 1978 or even 79, this one was probably his least impressive out of the 3. Next up is Chris Dickerson in 1982, a one-time Mr. Olympia winner who doesn't always get the credit that he deserves. At 43 years old, Dickerson stepped on stage in London with a physique that was sharp, balanced, and very polished. This was the same year that Frank Zayn came back with more mass than usual, weighing close to, if not 200 pounds, and many thought he was set to reclaim the title. But Dickerson brought something that stood out, and that was immense refinement. While he was never known for having that wow factor or iconic aesthetics, his physique in '82 was complete from head to toe. His conditioning was on point, his legs were extremely well developed for that era, and his posing was clean and very confident. He may not have had the shape or charisma of Zayn, but he didn't really need to, and he also didn't have any major weaknesses either. The decision could have gone either way, no doubt, but it's not one of those Olympias that kind of feels controversial in hindsight. In fact, when you look back at the lineup, Dickerson was arguably the most well-rounded competitor. He brought a very professional, composed look, and posed with a lot of energy and confidence. For that reason, I'm placing Chris Dickerson's 1982 win in B tier. It wasn't the most iconic physique ever, nor the most iconic win, but it was a deserving victory built on solid proportion, detail, and poise, and of course elegance as well, and he beat a former three-time Mr. Olympia champion in the process. Taking us to 1983, we arrive at one of the most underrated yet flawless physiques in all of Olympia history, Samir Banu. This was a transitional year for the sport, no doubt. With no clear favorite and legends like Frank Zayn past their prime, the stage was wide open. Samir had always shown promise but struggled with condition. That all changed in Munich. In 1983, Banu nailed everything. At just 188 pounds, he looked dramatically bigger thanks to near-perfect symmetry, full muscle bellies, and arguably the best back in the game at the time. His signature Christmas tree lower back was so defined, it literally coined the term. While others like Mohamed Makaway and a young Lee Haney were very impressive, Samir's combination of aesthetics, condition, and pure polish was simply unmatched. His physique truly flowed from head to toe, tight waist, full chest, detailed arms, and incredible detail from behind. Unlike many champions, Samir was never known for freaky mass or dominating the sport long term, but on that one night his look was virtually flawless. It was everything a classic Mr. Olympia should have been. That is why Samir Banu's 1983 win confidently lands in S+ tier. It may have been his only Olympia title, but it was executed to near perfection, a beautiful physique at its peak in the right place at the right time. Now we move on to Lee Haney in 1990, who was already a six-time Mr. Olympia champion and heading into his seventh when things took a very unexpected turn. For the first time ever, the Olympia was drug-tested, a move that sent shockwaves in the entire sport and changed the way the physiques looked on stage. Haney, like most other competitors, looked a lot flatter, softer, and less imposing. While Haney still had his trademark structure, the broad shoulders, tight waist, and flowing shape, the edge wasn't really there in my own opinion. He lacked the sharp detail and imposing size of previous years. In fact, he was actually beaten by Lee Labrada in prejudging, only pulling ahead by the finals. Even Haney himself later admitted that others like Mike Christian may have actually deserved the win that night. Overall, the 1990 Mr. Olympia was definitely not a proud moment for the sport. It was a political response to anti-steroid pressure, and the result was a lackluster lineup that left many fans very disappointed. Still, Haney was able to hold on to his title, but it was by far his weakest showing. For that reason, Lee Haney's 1990 win lands in B tier. He still got the job done, but it was the closest that he ever came to losing during his reign, and easily the least dominant of his 8 Mr. Olympia victories. Closing out Dorian Yates' Olympia reign, we arrive at 1997, a year that was both inspiring and very controversial. This was Dorian's final Olympia title, and while he still walked away with that Sandow, the cracks were clearly showing. Just 3 weeks before the show, he suffered a brutal triceps tear that left most of the muscle detached off the bone. But in true Shadow fashion, he pushed through and competed anyways. On paper, Dorian still brought insane size, granite-hard condition, and dominated several mandatory poses, especially from behind. From the rear, he was untouchable, but from the front and side, the physique was clearly not at its best. His injured arm looked deformed, his triceps lacked fullness, and the flow was completely gone. Compared to his earlier years like 1993 or 95, it was a shell of his former self. And while I often defend this win based on technical judging, the truth is it really didn't look like a Mr. Olympia physique in practice. Nasser El-Sambadi and Shawn Rhoden both brought arguably even more complete and balanced looks that night. Many fans believe Nasser should have won, and honestly, they have a very strong case. Because of that, I would have Dorian Yates' 1997 win landing in C tier. It took insane grit and toughness to even step on stage, but this version of Dorian didn't really meet the standard that you would expect from an Olympia champion, and it sent the wrong message about what should be rewarded at the Olympia level. Jumping ahead to 2002, we hit Ronnie Coleman's 5th consecutive Mr. Olympia, a win that's technically solid but far from brilliant. Ronnie had reigned supreme since 1998, and although he dominated with mass and condition in other years, 2002 was noticeably different. That year, he actually came in a lot leaner than usual, having extended his prep longer than usual as well, only to lose a lot of mass in crucial areas like the arms and legs. Across prejudging, fans and even competitors watched Gunter Schlierkamp completely outperform Ronnie from most angles. Chris Cormier recalled that Gunter was basically leading the show ahead of Ronnie Coleman during prejudging, and even that Joe Weider believed that Gunter was giving Ronnie a run for his money. On stage, Ronnie's physique was still monstrous. He had the best back development, insane condition, perfect symmetry as well. Maybe not perfect symmetry, but pretty good symmetry, I would say. But the subtle flaws were visible. He had a bloated waist, and his limbs were far from what they would be in 2003, or even from what they were a year prior. Now, Gunter had arguably better flow and proportion in other areas, and he was unfortunately only placed 5th in the final scoring. Multiple sources have called this one the closest, most debatable win of Coleman's entire reign, and for good reason. Now, in hindsight, it's hard to deny that Gunter brought the stronger look, at least from most angles, and many fans expected him to place higher. Ronnie still got the trophy, but it was far from a commanding performance. For that reason, I would have Ronnie Coleman's 2002 win landing in B tier. It was close, pretty controversial, and not at the level you would expect from a dominant Mr. Olympia, arguably the best Mr. Olympia ever, especially given the competition that night. Continuing into the late 2000s, we hit Jay Cutler's 2007 Mr. Olympia, his second title but also his most vulnerable. After finally toppling Ronnie Coleman the year before, expectations were sky high for Cutler to completely establish his dominance. Instead, he came in soft and flat during prejudging, clearly off from his 2006 form. His usual mass was obviously still there, especially in the legs, but he lacked the detail and separation needed to justify a repeat win. Meanwhile, Victor Martinez was unreal, arguably in the best shape of his entire career. His aesthetics, fullness, and condition outshined Jay in multiple poses, and even the head judges later admitted it was close until finals, and that Jay Cutler's minor improvements the next day were just enough to edge out Victor by a razor-thin margin of 4 points. Although Jay ultimately retained the title, it felt more like he survived it than dominated. Many fans still believe that Victor Martinez should have won this show, and this result marked one of the most controversial Olympia decisions of the entire decade and of all time. So because of the close call, if you even want to call it that, his completely off look in my own opinion, and the fact that he pretty much got lucky, I would say that Jay Cutler's 2007 victory earns a clear spot in C tier. The least convincing win of his 4-title run, with many even considering it to be the biggest robbery in all of Olympia history. Moving on to 2008, we have Dexter Jackson. This victory is often remembered as somewhat opportunistic. Jay Cutler was noticeably off, and although Phil Heath arguably brought a very impressive physique worthy of the title, the judges were not about to hand the Sandow to a newcomer on his Olympia debut. But make no mistake, Dexter seized his chance and brought a near-perfect combination of symmetry, condition, and classic lines to the stage. His physique that year showcased everything fans love about bodybuilding: razor-sharp condition, a tiny waist, and round, full muscle bellies. Even though circumstances might have favored him, this was not a weak win by any stretch. Dexter was legitimately at or very near his all-time best. When he lifted the Sandow up in the air, it felt deserved, even historic, signaling a shift towards more aesthetics over sheer mass. Sure, Dexter only won one Mr. Olympia, but the sheer quality and completeness of the package he presented that night firmly places it in S tier in my opinion. He was very balanced and had great condition, and was the most refined and consistent competitor on that stage, but in my opinion, for the reason that Jay was off and Dexter basically won because of it, I wouldn't really have him any higher. Going into the mid-2010s, we hit a real low point with Phil Heath's 2014 Mr. Olympia win, easily the most controversial of his entire reign. Coming off 3 dominant victories, Phil was expected to further solidify his legacy, but instead he stepped on stage with one of the worst abdominal presentations that we've ever seen from a reigning champion, or from any bodybuilder, I would say, at the highest level. His midsection was bloated and protruding badly, especially during prejudging, and what made it worse was the complete lack of definition, just a soft, swollen gut front and center. Unlike 2017 or 2018, for example, where his gut was distended but still kind of detailed and carved out, in 2014 it looked out of control. Now, to be fair, Phil had some pretty standout qualities outside of this. His arms and delts still had that signature pop and definition, and his back was amazing as usual, and his conditioning was very solid in most areas. But that gut was impossible to ignore. His main challenger, Kai Greene, actually brought a very complete and very competitive look as well, and arguably should have won. Yes, Kai had some midsection issues of his own, but nothing close to Phil's in my opinion. He was more balanced overall and pushed Phil pose for pose, making the final outcome feel debatable at best. Because of the glaring flaws, the bloated gut, and the close call against Kai Greene, Phil Heath's 2014 win firmly belongs in C tier. It was a disappointing moment in an otherwise rather dominant career. Now we arrive at one of the most celebrated upsets in all of Olympia history, Shawn Rhoden's 2018 victory. Now, this was his only Mr. Olympia win, unfortunately, but it was arguably his most polished and complete look ever. Even though some critics felt that he came in a bit flat, which he definitely did, Rhoden's combination of flowing lines, razor-sharp condition, and flawless shape for the time made him a breath of fresh air on that stage. He displayed one of the most impressive aesthetic physiques that we have seen in many years. Tight waist, sweeping quads, very nice abs as well, and beautiful symmetry from every angle and in every single pose. But what truly makes this win very iconic is what it represented. He dethroned Phil Heath, a 7-time Mr. Olympia champion, going for number 8, the face of bodybuilding at the time as well, and someone who had become known for pushing mass and condition, but also battling a distended midsection. Rhoden's victory basically told the world that aesthetics, shape, and balance are still very much important and integral to bodybuilding. It marked a shift in the sport, a return to a more classic ideal that had been completely fading in an era full of bloated guts and extremes. Because of the impact, the look, and the moment, I would say that Shawn Rhoden's 2018 Olympia win absolutely earns a spot in S+ tier. It was beautiful, meaningful, and very historic, all at once, and it was a true high point in modern bodybuilding. Next, we come to Brandon Curry's 2019 Olympia win. After years of climbing up the ranks and slowly transforming his physique, Brandon finally broke through and secured the Sandow. But while the win was well earned, it came during one of the most depleted Olympia lineups in recent memory. Reigning champion Shawn Rhoden was barred from competing, Big Ramy was sidelined, and then you had Phil Heath, who was very disappointed in his Olympia loss in 2018 and took the entire year off in 2019. That left the door wide open for someone new to rise up, and Brandon capitalized on that. Leading into the show, he was not even considered the clear favorite. Many fans and analysts were hyping up Rolly Winkler based on his freak factor and 2018 momentum, while others were eyeing William Bonac as a possible winner. But when it came down to it, Curry brought the most complete package of the night. His upper body was outstanding, massive arms, wide delts, full chest, and great flow, but the lower body, especially his hamstrings and quads, were definitely weaker. Now, the win was more about timing and opportunity rather than overwhelming superiority, and that's why I would say that Brandon Curry's 2019 Olympia win lands in A tier. He was the best on that stage, I'm not trying to debate that, but the stage itself was missing a lot of great names as well. A great physique overall and a deserved title, but not really a legendary win. Moving on, we have Big Ramy in 2021. After his shocking and well-earned Olympia win in 2020, expectations were high for him to come back even better. But when he walked on stage that year, it was clear something had changed, and not necessarily for the better. Ramy still brought his signature freak factor, but I would say that he lacked a lot of that sharpness and refinement that we saw the year before. His conditioning was decent but not exceptional, and detail in very important areas like the quads, chest, and lower back simply was not there. The midsection itself was also a bit blurrier than usual, making him look more like a giant mass of muscle rather than a polished champion. Despite all that, he still managed to hold off Brandon Curry by just 1 point in prejudging. It was a win, but a narrow and debatable one that did not really scream dominance. This version of Ramy was good enough to get the job done, but nowhere near the level fans had hoped for. For those reasons, I would place him in B tier. He retained the title, but did not really elevate his legacy the way a second win usually does. Up next, we arrive at Hottie Chupin's long overdue win in 2022. After multiple top 5 finishes and years of being labeled the most dangerous dark horse in the lineup, Hottie finally broke through and stood alone at the top. His physique that year was dense, detailed, and complete, boasting granite-like condition, deep muscle separation, and a compact structure that flowed well in most poses. His back was thick, his arms and chest were full and separated, and his trademark dryness was on full display from the front. But at the same time, this was not necessarily the best version of Hottie, compared to the freaky look he brought at the 2019 Vancouver Pro, or the even sharper and more refined package he had at the 2024 Arnold. 2022 Hottie was a bit flatter and kind of underwhelming in comparison to these competitions. And in my opinion, the gap between him and the runner-ups at the 2022 Olympia was razor thin. Derek Lungsford arguably matched or even beat him in structure and flow, while Nick Walker brought more size and arguably better freak factor. It was far from a dominant showing, but it was consistent, well-rounded, and backed by years of credibility and hard work. So while Hottie's lone Olympia win was not a runaway victory or an all-time physique by any means, it was still a very solid, well-earned moment that held off a surging new wave of talent. For that reason, he lands in A tier, a strong champion, just shy of legendary status in my opinion. Now we have Derek Lunsford's 2023 Mr. Olympia win, one of the most debated and controversial victories in all of modern bodybuilding. After making a historic move from 212 to open and placing second in 2022, Derek returned with a lot of hype. And while his physique was certainly impressive, great X-frame, sharp detail from behind, and great overall shape, it left many fans and experts scratching their heads when his name was called in first place. The biggest issues were pretty hard to overlook. His quads lacked sweep and fullness, especially from the front. His chest and arms, while full, had very little detail, and several key poses like the side chest, side tricep, and most muscular looked awkward and underwhelming at best. The front lat spread in particular was a rather weak pose, lacking width and a lot of presence. He did have great back detail and a small waist, but his physique did not really feel like a Mr. Olympia winning look from top to bottom. The real controversy came from the fact that many believed Hottie Chupin brought a more complete and conditioned look, with better overall balance and fewer glaring flaws. Even if Derek had prettier shape, it felt like second place would have been a perfect result, a strong follow-up to 2022 and a clear sign of his upward momentum. Instead, he walked away with the title in a decision that really split the fanbase. For that reason, Derek Lunsford's 2023 Olympia win lands in C tier, not because he looked bad necessarily, but because the win itself felt unearned compared to what others brought to the stage. It was a solid physique and gets a lot more hate than it deserves in my opinion, but not Mr. Olympia caliber in my opinion as well. Finally, we close things out with Samson Dauda's breakthrough victory at the 2024 Mr. Olympia. After placing top 6 in 2022 and top 3 in 2023, many saw Samson as a future Mr. Olympia champion, and in 2024 he made that vision a reality. What made his win so satisfying was not just that he finally nailed his peak, but he clearly outclassed two previous champions, Hottie Chupin and Derek Lunsford, both of whom came in off the mark. Now, Samson brought everything together: towering presence, flowing lines, round muscle bellies, and much improved condition. For the first time, even his back poses, usually his biggest weaknesses, looked pretty solid and well-defined. His combination of size, shape, and balance evoked comparisons to legends like Haney, but with a modern edge of mass. From the front, he was particularly untouchable, and his posing routine was one of the most commanding performances that I've personally seen in a long time. This was not a controversial win or a gift, it was a fully earned and well-deserved Olympia title. He beat everyone fair and square with a complete physique and a clean presentation. For that reason, I would have Samson's 2024 Olympia victory belonging in S tier, a dominant and defining moment that might just mark the beginning of a new era. Well guys, that about does it for this video. Let me know down below in the comments your thoughts and opinions, and of course I hope you enjoyed this one. With that being said, I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.